Hello and welcome to the iniBuilds A300 Ground School. In this first episode, what we're going to be covering are the technical aspects of the aircraft from the interior all the way through, looking at the overhead panel, the FCU, the pedestal, flap configurations, and the basic ECAM functions. So, what is the idea behind the iniBuilds Ground School? What we want to do is we want to try and give you a technical introduction to the A300. This is not going to be this SOP, so standard operating procedures of how to operate this aircraft. It's simply how the aircraft works to give you a much better understanding of the technical background with a little bit of history of the A300 put in at the same time. We're also going to go over the EFB, the FMS, and we do intend to eventually bring this course into the skies with a flying section, but once again this will only be based on the technical aspects of this aircraft. For SOP, so like I said, standard operating procedure, how you want to do it, it's up to you, and we will be also providing a video to another content creator that will be showing you how to do this. So where are we sitting? At the moment we're sitting on the cargo apron in East Midlands Airport, ready to do our flight to London Gatwick Airport. The cargo apron is definitely a natural habitat for the A300 at this time, because most of the ones operating around the world at this time are indeed simply the cargo variants. But as you can see, we've really been able to capture sort of the essence of the A300, and from this view gives you a really nice overview of what the flight deck looked like. So let's jump into the captain's seat and crack on with this video. So one of the things we've been able to do here is we've been able to actually really capture the nice essence of the aircraft. We can see with the texturing, the wear, and we have the curved screens and all this sort of stuff. But that's for you to enjoy as you go along. Let's get into how we actually operate the plane. But it's a really nice place to sit with it just cold and dark here like this now. Let's take a look at the overhead panel. The overhead panel on the A300 is absolutely enormous. As you can see, I can't even fit the whole thing in on this view, which is quite funny. It's also curved slightly in and bends down towards you just to try and fit everything in your arm's reach, basically. I obviously, apart from some aircraft that I might not be aware of, but for a modern Western airliner, it's got to be one of the biggest overheads ever. Now, that does come from the fact that this was one of the very first dual pilot aircraft. There's no flight engineer. There was never envisioned to be any flight engineer on the A300-600. And that's why a lot of the controls have basically all been put into one space, so they kind of run out of space. Let's put it that way. So, what can we see going on here? Well, all the switches in our cold and dark position, and we can see no lights are on the overhead panel, apart from the external power, which is showing as avail, because it's plugged into the bottom of the aircraft and ready for us to be used. But that's fine, we're not going to use it straight away. First of all, let's power on the batteries and see what it sounds like. So, any battery you want, but logically you're going to start with battery number 1. So here we go. We can hear the aircraft now has come to life with DC power. So direct current power is now going through the aircraft. You can actually see the fuel quantity indication doing a little bit of a self-test there, where it will show low level, and it also shows 7s all the way across the indications while it's doing this self-test. Now you can see it's changed to the actual fuel we have on board. We're going to need to fuel up. As you can see, we've only got, well, not enough fuel to get us where we need to go. So now you can see that's done its little self-test, and if you're very careful, you'll be able to see on the power on, not all the lights come on at exactly the same time. Everything is delayed, just like the real aircraft. At the moment, we only have one battery on, so let's turn the next one on, and the next one. You'll also might be able to hear a sort of a whine, I think is the best way to describe it, and what that is it's more obvious in older aircraft. So in an A320 series aircraft, for example, you won't really hear this noise. But in an aircraft such as the 737 Classic, you will hear it. They are the gyros spinning up. So the gyros in the aircraft, once they start spinning, they make this kind of whirry noise, which is what you're hearing right now. There are a few, not that many actually in the A300 considering its age, but that's what you can hear right now, and they're being powered by the DC system. So once we power the aircraft on, we can hear it. So what's our next step? So now we've got DC power onto the aircraft. You can either, it's completely dependent on what you want to do, attach the external power, press it on, or start the APU. If you choose to start the APU now, obviously you're not going to be able to actually monitor the APU start other than on the maintenance panel, which is on the rear wall. We've actually modeled the APU section of the maintenance panel as well. So how do I connect external power to this aircraft via our EFB menu? Let's take a look now. So this is the EFB that is included with the INI A300. We'll go through various functions of this, but this is not an EFB tutorial. We're simply for a startup. So we logically go to ground ops, ground services, and we can see here all the different things we can attach to the aircraft. So we can attach external power. So clicking and unclicking, as you can see, makes the green box go from amber, or well, more yellow, to green. Green is connected, amber is not. So we can also request air stairs, which you can see now have come in and they're attaching to the aircraft. That bong noise was the fact that the doors are opening automatically. It's a little bit of a thing we've done to help you out in the sim. There's no need to manually open the doors. They'll do it for you once requested. And if I clicked loader, the cargo loader would also approach the aircraft now and automatically start loading the cargo. Along with fuel truck. It's not required for refueling, it's simply an immersion option, so you can request a fuel truck. AC unit is actually the air start unit, so it will help you if you choose not to use the APU or the engines to start, but that's a more of an advanced thing, not for this quick start tutorial. And the pushback truck is the integration with better pushback. So pretty simple. So from the top to the bottom, external power, we've got the chocks, the air start unit, pushback, air stairs, so the stairs to connect to the aircraft, the loader for cargo, and the fuel truck. So let's get rid of them all apart from the external power, which is what we want to use today. Okay, now we're looking back at the overhead so you know how we would get this external power indication shown. So now let's connect the external power. Now, a few things before we do this. Number one, it's going to get quite loud, which is normal, because what will happen is the avionics fans will spool up, and they are very loud actually. Actually, most of the noise in the flight deck of, I wouldn't say any airliner, but most airliners is actually the avionics cooling, which is underneath the flight deck. So all the avionics stuff sits underneath the flight deck and needs a massive amount of air to cool it, and they're very, very loud fans. Also, unique to the A300 is if you turn it on, you'll kind of hear a crackly noise. If any of you have ever plugged or unplugged a speaker cable, it's that kind of half plugged in, half plugged out. Now obviously, to get a definite answer of where this comes from is almost impossible, but what we've worked out from the external power noise is it sounds like an audio jack coming in and out of a sort of MISC setting. So when you click this on, what you're actually hearing is the speakers that are in the aircraft getting a sort of spike of AC power. Because as we said before, the batteries are responsible for DC power, so direct current power, and the external power supplies us AC power. So once we press this, all of the AC circuitry in the aircraft will be powered, and momentarily those speakers sort of get a little bit of a spike, so you can hear the like a pop noise as it gets connected. Also note, when I turn this on, not all of the lights will come on at the same time. This is due to the buses that they're powered on, and the delays are actually 100% accurate to the real aircraft. Well, as close as we can get them, let's put it that way. So let's put the power on now. So as I said, the avionics cooling, it's quite loud and actually makes sitting in the flight deck, even when the engines are shut down, quite a noisy experience. But you can see the avail light has now gone to blue for on, and the batteries appear to have turned off. Now, have they turned off? They haven't turned off. That was a trick question. What you can see is, at this time, right this very second, it looks like they're all off. But here's a little bit of sort of idea behind how the A300 is built and actually most modern Airbuses. So you can see there's kind of what you would describe as a diagram of the electrical system up here. So when the batteries need charging, they will connect themselves automatically to the electrical system to get charge. And these little green bars, as you can see pointing to battery 3, is called a flow bar. So it will go inline green. So basically it will go, I need power, and it will connect itself to the electrical system, charge for the required amount of time, and then disconnect again. Now, this isn't a set thing. You can see at the moment none of them need charge. It's random, and for us it's based on the electrical loads and demands of the system. But don't worry if you turn the plane on and you think, oh no, the batteries are off. No, they're not off, they're on at this time. See, and then battery 2 has connected itself up, and the flow bar is inline green. It can be a bit confusing, but don't worry. Basically, if you turn the batteries on and then turn the power on with external power, you're good to go. So, where do we move on to next? Let's talk a little bit about basic Airbus principles. Now, a lot of people say that the lights out cockpit approach, or dark cockpit, was invented with the A320. That's not true, actually. The A300 was the very first Airbus with this concept. I wouldn't say 100% implemented, but 90% of the way implemented. And they actually collaborated with Porsche Design to design this aircraft concept. The entire A300 flight deck was done in collaboration between Airbus and Porsche to try and design the best possible, they call it human-machine interface. And they came up with, or I don't know who came up with it, someone came up with it between the two of them for the dark cockpit. Now what does that mean? How does that affect us? And why do we care? Well, what it means is if you see a light on, something's wrong. Now this is different to Boeing's. So in a Boeing or an Embraer, or I don't actually know, I shouldn't say Embraer, we'll stick to just Boeing and Airbus, it's simpler. So in a Boeing, if you see a light is on, that might not necessarily be a bad thing. It might be it's showing you it's on, or it's off, or it's whatever. In an Airbus, you should look at the overhead panel and not see any lights on. In normal operations, in flight. That's what we're on about. So, what are we looking at right now then? Well, we can see that there's a lot of lights that are showing off, or low pressure, or whatever. And that's because we haven't set the aircraft up yet. So, that's just a little bit of background behind what this means. So, what we would normally do for a standard operating procedure is we'd run through a checklist now, checking the entire aeroplane, checking to see what's turned on and what's turned off and all this sort of stuff. We're not going to do that. We're going to assume everything was set up right, because let's be perfectly honest, if we're using a panel state, it's exactly how we loaded it. The reason that these flows are very important in the real world is you have no idea who used the airplane last. Did they turn it off properly? Did they turn these switches off properly? Are they broken? Etc, etc. So realistically in the sim world, when you've loaded the cold and dark preset, every switch will be in the position it should be, because that's how the preset works. So now let's start with a small scan looking through the system. Okay, you join me now as more of a sort of overall view of the overhead panel. You can actually hear that the avionics cooling sounds slightly different. That's due to the directional F-mod audio package that we have in, where the avionics air is actually coming into the correct part of the flight deck, which is a nice little feature. So let's start on the bottom left and work up. So seatbelt signs, they're here. No smoking. We can put that into auto if we want. Here's the dome, strobe and light section. So let's talk a bit about these. What do they do and when do we use them? Storm light, if we switch the storm light on, you can see we can't see anything on the overhead panel, but what it does is there are small fluorescent bulbs that are on the underneath of the main instrument panel, and they illuminate. Now, why is it called the storm light? Well, if you're flying towards lightning, so generally associated with a storm, fine enough, you actually want the flight deck to be quite bright in case there's a lightning strike and you get blinded, because it's incredibly bright when it's near the aeroplane, but if you were already looking at a bright light, it's not as damaging, or it's not as shocking for when it happens, but mind the pun there. That's what it's for. But often it's not used, you know, when you're on a storm. Crews can use it whenever you want. If you like the look of the light, feel free to use it. Dome light, it's pretty self-explanatory. It just turns the dome lights on the overhead panel, used all the time for night operations. And there's a bright and a dim switch. Storm light has no bright and dim switch, it's just either on or off. Dome light is either bright or dim. These, as you can see, there's no click spots on them, simply because there's no way to really model it in the sim. This is the mechanic call light, so there's a little bell, or more of a horn, actually, in the gear bay, and if you press it, it makes a beep noise, like that. That's literally what it sounds like. And it's basically the, I need you to put the headset on to talk to me noise, but obviously there's no person there in the sim, so it has no function. Moving up, we have the hydraulic panel, and you can see that you have the blue, the green, and the yellow system, and they're all in their respective green bands, so we can see if they are or not. Now this is a little bit off topic, but let's talk about it right now. The biggest difference between a modern Airbus, so we're talking 320, 330, 340, 350, etc., etc., and the A300, is the fact that you have an analog backup of nearly every single system. So you can see here, I don't have to look down at the screen to see how much hydraulic pressure I have, or sorry, how much hydraulic fluid quantity I have. I can see it right there on the gauge. That was because there was a deep mistrust, sensibly so, when this aircraft was first built. So these systems are from the A310, the avionics systems and the sort of design of the flight deck, which first flew in 1982. So that's very, very impressive that they're able to get this style flight deck with quite advanced avionics in 1982. But in 1982, they didn't really trust screens, and they didn't really trust a lot of the computers they had on board, because you know when you see a plane that's come out in 1982, that means most of the computers were built in the 70s. So I don't know if you've ever seen a car from the 1970s. I'm not sure I would trust a computer from the 70s that can fit inside of an aeroplane. But actually, ultimately, it's been proven that they were far, far more reliable than they expected, and that's why modern aircraft use them today. So, moving on, let's not get too sidetracked. We have the hydraulic systems. We have the blue, green, and yellow. Bit confusing because they're in a slightly different order than they would be on a modern Airbus. So on a modern Airbus you normally have, let me try and remember this, you normally have green, blue, yellow, but in this we have blue, green, yellow. But as per a modern Airbus, the green system is the primary system, the blue is no, I wouldn't say it's the secondary system, but it's just another hydraulic system, and the yellow is the sort of third system, and with the rat in it. There's just three systems, green being the primary, the other two being secondary. PTU, what does it stand for? What does it do? So it stands for Power Transfer Unit. Now, what does it do? What it does is it transfers hydraulic pressure between the different systems. Now we have two. So the nice thing actually with the A300, I kind of wish that they kept this going, is you don't really need the manual. You can just look at these diagrams and work out what it means. So what does it mean? Okay, so here's the yellow system, here's the green system in the middle, and it's connected to the blue system. Well, how does it connect to the blue system? Via the PTU. Well, I can put the PTU on and it will be connected, and I can put the other PTU on and it will be connected. Obviously nothing's going to happen because there's no hydraulic pressure, but once we make those connections, those systems would be powered up. So how could we power those systems up? Well, we could use the electrical pumps. Now please note the word pumps. So it's one button here, so it's on, low pressure light because the system is spooling up, but it has two electrical pumps. Now it's quite cool actually. We've modelled each pump is dependent on the correct electrical system. So if you've had a system failure on one of the electrical buses, the pump runs at half speed. Well, I wouldn't say the pump runs at half speed, it doesn't build the pressure up as much because there's only one pump, I think is a fair way to say it. But now we can actually see that the green system is powered. So now if we want to power the blue system, we can connect it, so we're transferring the power, the hydraulic power as such, via the power transfer unit. And let's give it a little bit of a second, and we can wait. And and you can see that the low pressure light's gone off, and the same on this side here. And we can see that all the low pressure lights for the hydraulic systems are slowly turning off because they're getting their associated power. with the spoilers and all the fault lights eventually disappearing. So that's basically a very, very, very short overview of the hydraulic system. We're not going to go too in depth. You wouldn't turn it on for a normal startup, but that was just a sort of overview. Let's turn it all off and imagine we didn't touch it at all. Checking the servo controls. What are these? What do they do? Why are they there? Very when I say strange system, I mean strange compared to more modern Airbuses. You can actually detach the flight controls from the hydraulic system. So if we press blue, then the blue flight controls are detached from the hydraulic system. I'm not going to go any more in depth into that, other than there's a cool little party trick, because Airbus always know that pilots sometimes can be a bit stupid. If you turn all three off, like this, they all turn on. Now let me say that again. So if you turn all three of them off, they all turn on. Now, why might that be? Well, logically, if you've turned off all three of them, you have no flight controls. The plane won't fly anymore. You move the yoke, it won't do anything. So Airbus thought, I don't think the person who wanted to do this meant to do that. So I'm going to assume that they did it wrong, and I'm going to turn them all on. So that's what it does. And that's modelled, and that's fully modelled in the iniBuilds A300, which is cool. But obviously, guarded switch, you'd never touch it. Moving up, pitch feel, rudder travel system, and this is the pitch feel system, just sort of the weight behind the yoke. It doesn't really have a function. We've modelled, obviously, off-light, because there is no real hydraulics that you're using when you move the yoke around, so it's there, but doesn't really do much. Rudder travel system, it's modelled, and it works properly. So the rudder on any modern airliner, the quicker you go down the runway, or well, let me rephrase that, the quicker you go in the air, the less rudder travel you get. Why? Now, this is actually quite relevant to the A300. The rudder is an incredibly powerful flight control. Now, when you move the rudder, you think, oh, yeah, it's moving the plane around quite a bit. That's because it's limited in its amount of movement, massively, by the rudder travel limiter system. So the faster you go, the less you can move it to stop the pilot accidentally damaging the tail. Now, there's a tragic accident of an American Airlines A300 where they encountered wake turbulence, and the first officer, unfortunately, he overreacted on using the rudders, and he cycled them back and forth, full 3 or 4 times, and the entire fin, so the rear section of the tail, broke off, and they lost control, and they crashed into one of the areas of New York, I believe. Unfortunately, everyone was, it was a tragic accident, but it highlights that was even with the rudder travel limiter system enabled. With it disabled, you get far too much rudder travel, and you can flip the airplane upside down. Now, you can try it in the sim. Obviously, the fin isn't going to break off because it's a sim, but it gives you an idea of what the plane would do if, like, sort of moments before it break off. So feel free to play around with it. It's there, it works, but should just leave it on. Ground control. So most airlines operators tell you to turn this on, because what it does is the flight data recorder will not record until the engines have started, but a lot of operators now like you to just manually turn it on so they can now hear what we were saying together. Obviously, you can hear what I'm saying right now because I'm recording it anyway, but anyway, it's quite convenient because then you can see what did the crew talk about before takeoff, etc, etc. So that light will go out automatically once the engine has started, because like I said, it normally starts at engine start, so then it's not needed anymore. So anyway, that's that. Moving up a bit higher on the overhead, I've zoomed in ever so slightly because this is quite hard to see, is you've got this panel here. Do you remember we said that they had a massive mistrust of screens? This is another indication of that. So we can have a look here at what a lot of the different systems on the aircraft are doing electrically. This is fairly similar to a Boeing, and I might reference, when I talk about Boeing, I'm on about 737 because it's the one that I know the most about, and sort of period-wise is the one that's most applicable to the A300-600. So I know a 777 doesn't work like this and it's a lot more advanced, but when I say Boeing, that's what I mean. So, batteries. So that's battery 2, that's battery 3. So we can see that battery 2 has actually got a bit of a higher voltage than battery 3. and battery 1 has got the highest voltage of them all. And actually, if you just saw there, the voltage dropped on battery 1. That's because of the charging, discharging sort of sequence that's going on. So let's put it onto the essential. Now, what is ESS? What does it mean? What does TR mean? Let's talk about it. TR stands for Transformer Rectifier. So it turns the DC power into AC power. So AC/DC. Great name, great band. Anyway, slightly getting sidetracked there. So we can see here that the DC volts are correct. They're nice and stable on the essential bus. And we can see that the amps, it's just reading a little bit of amps because that's what the power is going on the system. Transformer Rectifier 1, same thing. Transformer Rectifier 2, same thing. And the essential bus is there. Slightly misspoke there. This is the essential bus, the voltage and the amps, and this is the essential transformer rectifier. So, just again, this is the essential transformer rectifier, transformer rectifier 1, transformer rectifier 2, and the essential bus. And yeah, just have a look through. Again, I said it's not an SOP thing. I said I wouldn't mention it again, but I will. I'm going to keep doing it. We're just taking a look at the plane. So, what's this AC section for? So, it's the same thing as the right. I'm not going to go through it all again, but it will show you the voltages, the frequencies, and the AC volts of all the different things. And if the aircraft uses a generator, so at the moment, it's a question. Here we go. Oh, don't fail it. Don't worry. It's a tutorial. We're all allowed to fail it. Is there any generators in use right now? No, there isn't. That was a trick question. So there are no generators in use. We are using the external power, which is not a generator, so there is no AC load because there is no generator to be used. So what is a generator and where will it be used? Well, the APU has a generator, the engines have a generator each, so we could see that the Gen 1, Gen 2, APU gen, but they're not running, so we can't look at them, but there we would see an AC load. You can also view this on the ECAM screen, but as I said, deep mistrust of screens, etc., etc. So let's move on and zoom back out to a more comfortable level. Okay, you join me again on the sort of wider view of the overhead because it's so enormous. We're not going to go through all the entire electrical system here, but it's a lot of different functions, a lot of different things, all of them modelled, which is very nice. A few little cool things that I will mention though. The standby generator, this actually uses hydraulic power to convert itself to electrical power, and it's in case of sort of loss of power you can press it on, and as long as you've got a green hydraulic power it will power some of the electrical systems. Batteries, we've already talked about the fact that they're connecting up and all this sort of stuff, and these lights will illuminate when needed. Land recovery is for emergency electrical configuration, battery overrides. So what does this do? Well, basically it connects all of the batteries. See, they're no longer sort of doing what they need to do. It's like, hey, connect now, I need you now. And that's used in different circumstances, so that works. This override supply, so if you turn off the override supply, it will effectively fail one of your AC buses and connect it automatically, but again, more of an advanced sort of emergency style thing we're not going to go through. APU gen and the gen, so what's this? So these are the generators. It's showing a fault light because even to this day a lot of modern Airbuses do this. We mentioned the lights out concept. That is true, but there are a few exceptions. So it's normal to see a fault light on the generator. It's not broken, it's just because it doesn't have any power, it's like, oh, there's a fault. But that's because it's not spinning, because it's not on, so that's fine. External power we talked about. Galley is normally left in the shed position, so we put that on, and that's basically just disabling all the stuff for the galley, like the cookers and coffee maker and all that sort of important stuff. Moving down, pitch trim, yaw dampers, ATS, engine trim. What is this and what do they do? Well, these are quite A300 specific. So, yaw damper, let's go to the one that isn't. Fairly self-explanatory. It's the yaw dampers. They're either off or they're on. So, no more needs to be said for that. Put them on. They don't want to be off, ever. In fact, I mean, I'm sure there's sort of a failure state that they do, and it will be commanded by the ECAM, but normal operations, they need to be on. Now, pitch trim. What's a bit weird about this? So, turning either pitch trim 1 or pitch trim 2 to the on position will power up the AFS. What is the AFS and what does it do? It stands for the Auto Flight System, which is, it's basically just the autopilot computer in simple terms. Obviously it needs to be on. It's always a good start if it's on. Now, does this attach to that to power it up? I mean, it's a good question. It's probably for someone in Airbus to answer, but that's just the way it works. But what that gives you is it gives you a strange look to the FCU. So let's take a look at it now. So here we are looking at the FCU. Do you notice something strange about it? I'll give you a minute. No? Okay. Well, or maybe yes. Good call, I should say each side. Anyway, it's totally blank, along with the TRP. What is the TRP? Let's introduce it now. It's the thrust rating panel, I think. Please don't crucify me if I got that wrong. I think it's thrust rating panel. Anyway, these both need signals from the AFS to work. So with the pitch trim in the off position, they don't do anything. They're blank. So you need to put at least one of the pitch trim switches on, and then you will get the AFS powered up. This is very much an A300 thing. If you see this, it's not broken. I'm more than confident that many people when they buy this plane will think, it's broken. Which is, to be honest, that was my first thought when I was starting work on the A300, thinking, what does that do? That's broken, that's not right. No, it's exactly as it should be. So let's go back on the overhead panel and turn it on. So here we are, let's turn on, just to prove that you don't need both, let's turn on pitch trim 1. So here we are, and now you can see the FCU is filled in and the TRP has numbers on. So we're good to go. Another note, I may mix my Airbus terms. I'm more familiar with modern Airbuses, so if I do, please, I think we all know what I'm talking about when I say FCU, and which is, for Boeing people, the MCP, the Mode Control Panel, or the Flight Control Unit. It's the thing that you control the autopilot with on the top of the screen. Well, on the top of the glare shield. So, just get that out of the way. If I mix my terms, I'm sorry, but that's why. There's a good reason for it. Let's go back to the overhead. So back on the overhead, let's turn on the other pitch trim ADS. What does this do? It's the Auto Thrust System, which was renamed from Auto Throttle System because the A300 originally liked to copy quite a few Boeing terms, because it's quite interesting that this plane was built essentially taking a lot of influences from Boeing, and they didn't want to kind of go their own path. So initially they called stuff Auto Throttle, and then they renamed it Auto Thrust, like on the A320 family, and you'll see a few of these different things, but it's interesting. Engine trim. Now this is only on the General Electric engines, which is the ones that we are flying today. On the Pratt & Whitney engines you will not see this. I'm not going to go into the technicalities behind it, but what does it mean if you turn this on? Basically don't, because it's kind of an interesting experience. When you increase the thrust in flight or on the ground or whatever, that panel, the thrust rating panel, will limit the thrust to toga or maximum continuous thrust or flex thrust, or we'll come to it when we get there, but it will limit the thrust to an appropriate value. The engine trim disregards this value and goes full power. Now in reality, I believe, this is my understanding, that if you had the engine trim on and pushed the engines full power, they would both just explode, because you are going 10-12% above the maximum N1 for the engine. But in the sim, we've modelled it, and we haven't modelled the fact that the engines explode. We could have, but we don't want someone who's just playing with the plane on their first flight, press the button, put the power on, and then the engines just both explode, because it's, let's just put it this way, mildly inconvenient. So you actually just get hilariously high climb rates because the engine has gained 12% performance. But it's modelled, it's there, and you also get an associated ECAM, which is quite nice. Anti-ice, so engine, wing, fairly straightforward. You put it on, you put it off, you can turn it on. Alternate supply, so that's just if you get a failed valve, you can use the alternate supply. Not really much to say about that. Lights, fairly similar, fairly conventional to a standard Airbus. So auto, what does auto mean? It's the I turned the lights on but forgot to turn them on but they still work setting. That's what I like to call them. So if you put it on auto, as soon as the aircraft leaves the ground, the strobe lights will come on. This isn't a normal, I know I said I wasn't going to do standard operating procedures, but bear with me. This isn't a normal SOP to leave it in auto. It's because you can put it in auto right now when you're on stand, and if you do forget, they will come on in flight, which is the most important time for them to be on. So that's what it does, and that's modeled as well. So let's just leave it in auto. Beacon, fairly explanatory, just a beacon light, the rotating beacon. Runway turn-off lights, they're the two edge lights, so on the nose gear, on the side of the plane, so to illuminate when you need to turn off the runway. They can go left, right, on. Nav and logo, System 1, System 2. What does this mean? There's two bulbs inside, and the reason is, you wouldn't think so, but if one of the bulbs has gone, you can't leave if it's nighttime. In the daytime you can, but nighttime you can't. So they've wired in two sets of bulbs, so if you look outside and one of my bulbs is gone and you put it on System 2, you can leave. That's not going to happen to you in the sim, but it's there, it works. Nose, taxi, takeoff, same as the A320, family, 330, 340, etc. So taxi is the normal position for taxi. Two lights on the nose wheel, both of them illuminate at a lower level, unlike the 320 where one comes on and the other one stays off. There, both lights come on, but at a lower level. Takeoff, both lights are on at a higher level. Landing lights, they are retractable under the wing, so again, like the 320. I know I'm bringing a lot of comparisons to Airbus, but that's because, let's be honest, most of us in the sim are familiar with other Airbuses, so I'm trying to show you what's similar, what's not, so you know, I know how that works, fine, let's move on. Or if you fly a Boeing, this is all new stuff anyway, so it's good to just review it all in its entirety. So when you put the lights on into the on position, they basically come out, and then you can also turn the light on. Okay, so let's go through that again. Retract means it's retracted. Off means they are in the airflow but the light isn't on. A completely pointless setting. Honestly don't know why it exists. Probably to do with maintenance, to be honest. Like if you need to change the bulb, that's my only thought, because in flight you would never put it in off. It doesn't make any sense at all. And then on, which is they are extended into the airflow and on. So you've got off, on, retracted, and they actually add a tiny bit of drag to the aeroplane, not that much, just a little bit, but it's noticeable. Wing light, just turns the wing light on and off, same thing where it illuminates the wing, so you can check it for ice in flight. That's generally what it's used for. Moving up, so in fact, let's just move the camera, because even at this monstrously zoomed out setting, we still can't see the whole overhead. Now here's the entire overhead. So one of the panels that we skipped before, and I wanted to do it when we get to here, is because it's kind of spread across all the different panels, is the IRS system, or I think it's the IDSU, something like that. It's the IRS display unit. There you go, that's correct. Which is on the left side here. So on a lot of modern aircraft, the switches are all located on one panel. So you have 1, 2 and 3, or 1, 3, 2, or whatever, it doesn't really matter. But in the A300 they're spread across all of them. So I know I skipped it, but I wanted to explain it now. So you can put it to nav, nav, nav. So now the IRSs are aligning. What are the IRSs? What do they do? Okay, an IRS is an inertial reference system. Like I said, this is not the most in-depth tutorial, so let's keep it simple. What do they do for us? So the plane needs to know where it is, so it can know where it is going, basically. This is already sounding a bit complicated, I know, but it needs to know where it is without GPS. Let's call it that, because a lot of A300s were delivered without GPS. The INI A300 has GPS, which is nice, but a lot of them didn't even have it. So what it's doing right now is it's trying to work out where am I on the globe, and it's doing that actually by sensing the rotation of the Earth, which is pretty incredible that it can even do that, simply by waiting to see it move and how much it moves, and that must mean I'm in this position on the globe. We'll come to how we align it in a minute, but let's take a look back at the panel and go no further than that. So let's just say, what do the IRSs do? It means that the plane can know where it is without GPS, and they're needed for flight. They are very, very critical for flight. And this goes for any aeroplane. Every aeroplane does the same thing with the IRSs. And if your plane has GPS, it doesn't mean that you just, oh, I don't need the IRSs. No, you need the IRSs as well. They're crucially important to flight. Even an A350 has IRSs with GPS integrated. So in the panel we have PPOS, present position. Well, it doesn't know where we are, so it has no idea. Track, GS, shows our track 268000, there's no speed. Test, just shows the test pattern. Wind, shows the wind. Heading status, so that's basically showing us a status message. There are various status messages that we've modeled. For example, if you're trying to align the IRS, one of the key things is you cannot move the aeroplane. Don't move it. If you move it, it doesn't know where it is anymore because it's moving, basically, so it gets confused. And you will get a message that, say, for example, says 53, which stands for excessive motion. Unfortunately, you're going to have to look those up online because it's just modeled after the real thing, but let's just keep it simple. Just don't move. Just leave it. And once they're aligning, this number here will tell you how many minutes it's going to take for it to align. Now, a cool thing we've been able to model is it doesn't always take 10 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever. It's based on where you are on the globe, like real planes. So if you're further away from the equator, generally it takes longer, and the closer you are, it takes less, kind of keeping it generic there, but let's put it this way, the time that it takes will be realistic to where you are on the globe, which I think's pretty cool. And you have all these little lights up here, so you can see it's in align mode. It's set battery to warn us that, hey, I'm using the battery, but that's sort of like a self-test thing it does to check it's on the battery, then goes on to the AC power. But that's where we're going to leave it for now until we come to the FMS, which is a topic most definitely of its own. And let's quickly just move back on to why we moved the camera back up here, which was this little sort of top section here. So we've got landing gear, and it shows that 3 are green and locked, and it also shows that the main MLG stands for main landing gear down lock, and it shows that they are down locked. This is kind of a backup indicator in case there's a failure in the main indication, which is down there. Cockpit voice recorder, simply it's just the cockpit voice recorder panel. The little self-test works on the arrow, and nothing that you need to do there. And also the IRS selector or IRR mode selector up there. So let's go back to our normal overhead view. Okay, the video is quite long at this point, so just to introduce to you how these videos and lessons are going to be structured, we're going to have individual episodes. An episode might be one part, or it might be multiple parts. For this part, seeing as it's the very first one that's split up, I'm putting this introduction here now to explain, but after the fact the video will simply fade out and the next part will be available. We're just doing this to simply make it easier rather than scrubbing through an hour-and-a-half or 2-hour video, splitting it up into 40-minute segments with the title given in the description, so you can kind of find the system that you want to look at. So from now on, the fade in and fade out will happen on the videos with no introduction, but for this first one, this small introduction gives you an idea of how we're going to segment them up. Thank you very much. I hope you did enjoy this very first part of the first episode of the iniBuilds Ground School. And if you did really enjoy it, go ahead and pick up the iniBuilds A300. I'm sure you'll have a fantastic flight. Thank you very much, and hope you enjoyed the video.